Hi, my name is Renford Reese. I'm a professor in the political science department and director of the Colorful Flags program at Cal Poly Pomona. We're here today as a part of the Prison Race series to have a conversation with Mr. John Sewell, a man who has worked in the LAPD for over 6 years. I want to talk to him about his policing philosophy, about being an African American in the LAPD, and about race in the criminal justice system. I also want to talk to him about the challenges of policing gangs in Los Angeles. Officer Sewell, glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Could you tell us something about your background growing up?
Okay. Well, I've been with the LAPD for 6.5 years. My parents were in the military, so I grew up. I went to elementary school in Japan. I also finished off elementary school in Memphis, Tennessee. And then my parents from there, they moved up to Oak Harbor, Washington, which is a town approximately 40 miles outside of Seattle. And then my parents were transferred again in the military out to a town in Southern California, China Lake or Ridgecrest. Growing up, I was a kid who was always into sports. I played football, ran track. From there, I went on to the University of Redlands, where I also, again, played football and ran track. My major at Redlands was political science and environmental studies. And, just growing up, I always wanted to be an officer. I was always in the back of my mind, but I had to find the right agency, and LAPD is definitely that agency.
Okay, so you said always, when you were growing up, in the back of your mind, you wanted to be in law enforcement.
Yes.
But when did these kind of thoughts really galvanize? Was it right after you graduated from the University of Redlands?
Well, although it was always in my mind, I really didn't focus on it until probably about like 2000. That's when I really started to just research all the different agencies, because although people may refer to all law enforcement officers as cops, they all have specific duties. You have the DEA, they focus mostly on narcotics. You have customs enforcement, they focus mostly on any kind of materials either coming or leaving the country. Secret Service, their responsibilities are protecting the president and trying to find any kind of counterfeit currency. And then one thing I like about LAPD is it's a big agency and there's a lot of different opportunities, and you can start off in patrol, kind of gather your skills and improve on your investigative skills, and then you work your way up from there.
So tell me about the LAPD. Tell me what it was like to be in, when you first got there. What was it like to be in training for the LAPD?
Well, when I was there, I came in 2002, October, and you had to start with the academy. At that time, it was 7 months, and the academy is run pretty much like a college atmosphere. You have coursework. The only addition is they require you have to wear a specific uniform, and you have physical fitness requirements. It's pretty intense. They teach you about different California laws and also how to talk to people and what you're likely to encounter out on the streets.
Okay, so you said it was 7 months. Out of the people, how many people came in your class in the academy?
66.
Okay, out of 66 that started the academy with you, how many people actually graduated from the academy?
We finished with, I believe it was 36. However, approximately 5 of those candidates were either injured prior to me starting, and then they entered our class. So really, we finished with about 30 to 33 or so of our own original starting cadets.
Okay, so how did you survive when almost half of the other cadets did not?
One thing is I took it very seriously. I knew that it was going to be stressful. I knew that there were going to be serious academic requirements and physical requirements. I didn't play around. It was not a game. I was focused on the academy. I studied at night. I didn't do one of these all-night, one-night wonder studies. Right before a big test, I would study little by little. Also tried to keep up on any new California laws. And that was pretty much it. It was how focused you wanted. And honestly, some people, when they get in the academy, when they realize what they're really going to be doing, I don't think they want to be an officer.
Right, okay. So tell me, what's the difference between being in training in the academy the lauded LAPD Police Academy and being in the streets as an officer for the LAPD?
Well, when you're in the streets, it's for real. Yeah, there's no playing around. You can't start over if you make a mistake. Actually, in the academy, it's a little bit of a sterile environment. But when you're on the streets, you have your training officer that's there with you, and you're, actually affecting arrest. And then also, it's very unpredictable as a patrol officer. 1 minute, you could be looking for a lost child, bringing that child home, and you see all the joy in the world from that family. The next minute, you could be going to tell a family or making a phone call to a family that they've just lost a child in a serious car accident, or that child has been shot. So you really have to be able to deal with the extreme highs and lows.
Okay, tell me about your first week in patrol.
First week, they really start you off slowly. I started in Wilshire. One of the first things I can remember doing was just a basic traffic stop, and you're trying to teach people about the various vehicle codes, and sometimes they get angry and they don't want to sign the ticket, and they may make references and insult you, or make references to law enforcement in general. But basically it was first week, you're hitting the ground running, chasing robbery suspects. I can remember going to a particular call in my first year where you had someone who was deceased, and then trying to kind of recreate their life so you can contact their family members. There's just a lot of variety in LAPD, but it was really exciting.
Right, so you hear about this incongruence between what is taught in the police academy and what is actually practiced on the streets. Is there a difference?
For me, I don't think there was much of a difference. I thought a lot of the policies, for me, I felt were similar. The one thing that's different about the academy, though, is that it's really like a sterile environment, and people only go so far. When you get out in the streets, a suspect that doesn't really want to go back to jail, or if they're a repeat offender or parolee, they will not hesitate to, yell at you, swing at you, try to cause you bodily harm, or even shoot at you. So, I think that's probably the biggest difference that I saw. Another officer, they may see it a little bit different, but I felt it was pretty much the same. A lot of the techniques, physical fitness-wise, as far as handcuffing, I use those same techniques out on the street.
Okay, so tell me what your policing philosophy is. You seem to be, and I know you personally, so I know this, very humanistic, very compassionate. I don't know if that might sound like oxymoron for a police officer to be compassionate, but you really do take your job as being a public servant seriously. And I just want to hear your policing philosophy.
Well, my policing philosophy is real simple, very compassionate person. I think by far of all the qualities that you would want in a police officer, compassion for me is the one that sticks out the most. That always very concerned about the citizens, want to protect their safety. That's one of the main responsibilities we have, is to protect life. However, when you do have these individuals that choose to break the law, if they want to commit a robbery or burglary, I wouldn't hesitate to take them into custody if I felt that they were the individual that actually committed that crime.
So, this is, I'm sure stunning to a lot of people listening to you and listening to your philosophy that revolves around compassion. Are you the outlier in the LAPD? And if you're the outlier, are you ostracized by other officers who are hard-nosed and tough?
No, I think it's like any business with policing. You have maybe some officers that may be a little bit more extreme. Some will have their own individual crimes that they think are more important just because of the way they grew up. Specifically for me, I'll tell you, one of the crimes that I really like to investigate is narcotics trafficking, and that's because of the way I was brought up. A lot of the gangs that were in some of the areas where I lived, they would try to terrorize people, and they would have a lot of money and be flashy, and I just felt that that's something that really hurts like the poor communities. And for one, that's one of the reasons why I really got into law enforcement at first. Thinking about it as a child is just I really like to investigate narcotics crimes. So I mean, but that's just me in particular. Every other officer, they may have their own individual reasons.
Right. The police have been vilified, especially in the minority communities. Do you feel this vilification is justified?
Well, no. I mean, let's take teachers, for example. You may have an example of a teacher at the high school level that may do something wrong. And I don't feel that it's right to judge all teachers because of what one teacher does. Same thing with officers. If you have one officer that breaks the policy, I don't feel that it's right to judge all officers based on that, because we're all different. We're all our own individuals. Although we may work for a police department, we have our own feelings, and we're not just one big machine that unilaterally thinks the same on everything. So that's kind of.
Okay, what were your initial reactions when you saw the videotape beating of Rodney King? How old were you at the time?
Was that 1990?
1991.
92? Okay.
The riots took place.
I just moved to California. I was in 10th grade at the time. I believe I was a sophomore in high school. I felt that I thought that it looked pretty bad, from the outside. So I thought I definitely felt that it looked pretty bad.
So tell me, what are your main challenges being in a city like Los Angeles and patrolling as a police officer? What are your main challenges?
I'd say the biggest challenge is trying to, I guess, please everyone, because there's a shortage of officers, and sometimes individuals may have to wait, a significant period of time for us to respond sometimes, and they're not happy. So you're constantly on the move, trying to go from one police request to another. I'd say that's probably the biggest. And you can be very busy in any particular day. Sometimes upwards of 40 to 50 requests. Right.
So you worked in Wilshire, you worked in Pacific Venice,
yes,
and you worked Hollywood.
Correct.
What was the most challenging out of all of your assignments?
I would say Wilshire, because I was a brand new officer at the time, and I was learning different policies and how to interact with the public. But all three of those divisions have their own different types of crime that exist. But I've enjoyed all three of them. So, but to answer your question, as far as the one that's the most difficult, I would say probably Wilshire, just because I was newer.
Right. Now tell me about the challenge of policing gangs. Los Angeles is notorious for its gang culture. What are the challenges that you've seen in terms of trying to police the gang community in Los Angeles?
One of the biggest challenges is trying to get people to come forward. And, kind of going back to my original reason for getting involved in law enforcement, some of these groups, they hold the citizens in their neighborhood hostage. And to get them to come forward and testify or to provide information that would lead to an arrest could be difficult.
So some say in order to police the gangs, you almost have to adopt and mimic their behavior. You don't seem like you're the type of officer that goes out and mimics the behavior of gang members.
Now, when they say mimic, are they referring to maybe like yelling and screaming at people?
Yelling, knowing the language, the slang, the vernacular of the gangs, having the tattoos, being just as hard-minded and hard-nosed as the gang members themselves.
One thing I'll say is I think you do have to be familiar with the language, and you have to be familiar with some of the tattoos because they may have different meanings. But I don't think you have to disrespect anybody to enforce the law. Because we're asked to be professionals, and it's pretty cut and dry. If you believe, someone did something that leads to an arrest, let them know they're under arrest and tell them to turn around and put their hands behind their back. Now, if they comply with you, that could be a different story, but you don't have to, scream and disrespect them. No, I don't think so.
Okay. Tell me about the gang culture in Los Angeles. What are the two or three biggest gangs in Los Angeles right now?
Well, I'm not a gang expert, but there's several. MS-13 is out there. They're a fairly large gang. Obviously, you have your Blood and Crip gangs. You have 18th Street. Then another big group that's out there is the outlaw motorcycle gangs. So they're all fairly, active. So.
Okay. You saw the film Training Day.
Yes.
And Alonzo Harris, probably the most depraved, one of the most depraved characters ever played in the film, in the movies. Tell me about what you thought about the film and his character.
I only remember the film vaguely. I thought it was over the top. I think a lot of law enforcement TV shows are over the top. I'll tell you, all my training officers were extremely professional. And one of the things we stressed in the academy was human relations. And, I had some very good training officers, extremely knowledgeable. And, communication is the biggest key. That first 10 seconds you meet with someone, you want to have that command presence, let them know you're an authoritative figure, introduce yourself. And I just don't think you have to be over the top like a lot of TV shows, I think that's just a little bit extreme.
So is it extreme? You don't see that amongst your colleagues, your comrades in the LAPD?
No.
So where does this reputation come from?
Because I think with Hollywood is they want things to be extreme. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you remember the show on ESPN a few years ago that was supposed to mimic the professional life of football players. It was called Playmakers. That was an extreme example of how someone would act. And over the top, and that wasn't necessarily a representation of how everyone acted. And even the linebacker from the Baltimore Ravens came out and said, this is just an extreme show. And I think that's kind of what kind of pushes Hollywood, is this an extreme. I don't think they could get people to just sit around and just watch individuals maybe just interact like themselves. Maybe LAPD Life on the Beat, that show, that's very similar to what it's like to be an officer.
Okay. So tell me about race in the criminal justice system. A lot of people look at police officers as being racially biased. Young black men, at least, are 6 times more likely to go to prison for a crime as someone who is white for the same crime. So do you see racial bias in the criminal justice system from your perspective?
No, because I'll tell you this. When you have an arrest, there's a police request that comes through from the dispatcher. They will tell you, we have a call to 911 for crime A, B, or C, whatever that crime may be. And then you'll have witnesses that'll say, this is the person that punched me. This is the person that took my property. This is the person that threatened me. So, going back to the public servant, we're essentially going off of what these witnesses say. It's not, the police officers walking up saying, oh, you know what, I just think you're the one that did the crime, so I'm just going to lock you up. You have to have some type of probable cause to take that person to jail.
But what about racial profiling? So what you're saying is racial profiling is not real?
Just as far as, let's say, just thinking a person is going to be more guilty of a crime because of their race?
Right.
No. You have good and bad people, all ethnicities.
But I'm not saying that you don't have good and bad people, but this whole notion of racial profiling has been highly publicized, and it's it's reality. Driving while black. The fact that you have officers that look at a person who is driving a nice car and automatically assume that they're breaking the law, that they're a gang member, that they're a pimp, or somehow not abiding by the law. That is real.
If it is, I haven't seen it on my job, but I will tell you this. I've given out citations, and when I stop someone, I pull them over and let's just say, for example, of running a red light. When I pull that person over, I don't care how pretty they are, how ugly they are, male, female, what race they are. If I've decided to give them that citation, they're getting a citation. Nothing else matters. I could care less about anything else.
So I can actually make the connection, because I see you have internalized a certain type of egalitarian principles. And so because you have not adopted the principles of racial profiling, you can't see that others around you are doing something that has been systematically proven to be widespread. I understand that. I can make the connection. I can see how you don't think it exists.
Now, I'll tell you this, I have my partner, and we switch up all the time. It's me and another officer. And, if we see something, the first thing we recognize is the vehicle. And then from there, we'll check the license plate and see if there's any warrants to the vehicle. That's standard on every traffic stop. And then once they're pulled over, if I'm the contact officer and I decide to give them the ticket, they're getting the citation. Now, I do give warnings, because in California you can give a warning if it's something small, but if it's something egregious and it's a major threat to the public, I really don't care who that person is. They're getting a citation.
But I mean, we all have discerning capabilities, right? We have the capacity to discern. That's what makes us sophisticated. We have this computational capacity. If you have an African-American, teenager, 18, 19 years old, his pants are sagging, he has cornrows, he's wearing a oversized tall tee, he's got a cap pulled to the side, right? And then you got a Chinese individual right here, he's got khakis on, he's got a shirt like yourself, right? He has a backpack. I mean, who in your mind is more liable to be a lawbreaker?
First question is, what reason would I have to talk to the person? Am I just walking up to them, talking to them, or am I being called there to investigate a crime? If I'm being called there to investigate a crime based on the witness testimony, they're already going to provide me a description of that suspect. Race will be one of the factors, but as far as just walking up and seeing someone, every case is individual in itself. When you walk up to someone, what happens today just happens today. And if I go out and patrol tomorrow, that's going to be a whole different case study. The individuals may not be connected, they may not even know each other. So I can't make any kind of connection based on, what happened today is going to amount to someone's guilt tomorrow. There's just no way, because each individual is separate, and all the cases are different.
Okay, tell me, you have this crisis with young black men. You are an ideal role model for so many, not just young black men, so many young men in general. So you tell me, what advice would you give these young black men who have embraced this gangster thug model, who are consistently breaking the law?
I would tell them it's a fairy tale lifestyle. Of course, if someone has, $1 million in the bank, they may be able to afford, the best legal counsel. But just because you can afford the best legal counsel doesn't necessarily mean someone should go out and break the law. You should always treat others the way you want to be treated. That's how I police the streets. I treat others the way I want to be treated, how I would like my parents and my family and my friends to be treated. I would tell them definitely stay in school, because knowledge is definitely the ticket out of whatever scenario they're living in if they're not comfortable with it. But the biggest thing, I think, is knowledge and respect. And that's what I try to promote as a police officer.
So when you see some of these young men who have gone wayward, do you pull them to the side and talk to them and tell them some of the things that you've just said?
Oh, I talk to anyone. One of the things as an officer, I probably even talk a little bit too much at some of these calls, because I always try to give individuals the best advice, something that I think will help them get out of whatever situation they're not happy with. If they're involved in alcohol or drugs, I'll tell them, pick a hobby. One of the things that I've done as a child is I really got into sports, and I was really into it as a youngster, and I'm into it today. And that's something that I love to do and love to watch. I think everyone has to have something that they love to do. And if they're not motivated and they don't have something they love to do, then I think that's where a lot of problems start. And it doesn't matter what that hobby is. If it's art, if it's music, if it's sports, if it's education, science, it really doesn't matter as long as they're doing something that's positive. That's I think the first step.
Do you have any memorable cases where you actually outreached and connected with someone?
Oh yeah, definitely. We had an individual. You have a young lady in her mid-30s, passed away. She had 2 young children, and I remember to this day very clearly going to the residence. You have the 2 young children, ages approximately like 4 and 6, in the next room over, don't even know that their mom has passed away, have no idea who their father is. The father figure was never even there. And then I realized that they have a older stepbrother who is completely distraught in his mid-teens. And I basically gave him my card and I told him, don't look at this as the end. I know your mom is gone, but just because your mom is gone doesn't mean you have to throw your life away. He was extremely distraught. And he and we even talked a couple times after that. Told him to just, get into sports or whatever he liked to do. And I just gave him, the best advice that I could. I ended up staying at the residence for probably about 2 or 3 hours, just trying to pass on information to him and his younger sisters.
Right. So are you still in contact with them?
No, I have not, maintained contact with them probably for like the last year and a half. It's probably, maybe early 2007 was the last time I talked to him.
Right. Okay, Officer Sewell, I want to thank you for coming in. You have just an incredibly inspirational approach to life. And it's been a pleasure talking to you and listening to your humanistic philosophy. And I think everyone should get something out of what you've said today. So often police are vilified. And I think the most important thing that you said is that each person, each police officer is an individual, and that you cannot use this broad brush to stereotype all police officers. And you just have a type of wisdom, a calmness, and a type of inner peace about yourself that I think is powerful. And I want to thank you again for coming in and having this chat with us today.
Thank you. All right.